What if everything you know about history is a carefully constructed lie? What if the greatest buildings on Earth were never built by human hands at all, but discovered, inherited from a world that vanished before our modern era even began? Today, we're going to prove it. Not with speculation, not with theory, but with mathematics. Cold, hard, undeniable mathematics that will make you question everything you thought you knew about civilization itself. The cathedrals were built by ghosts. The monument that shouldn't exist. Stand before the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Reims, France, and you're witnessing something impossible. This structure rises 149 meters in length, with towers reaching 81 meters into the sky. Every surface crawls with intricate stone sculptures, thousands of them. Angels, kings, saints, grotesques, each carved with precision that would challenge modern artisans. The interior vaults soar 38 meters overhead, creating a space so vast it seems to swallow sound itself. According to official history, construction began in the year 1211. They tell us it was completed in roughly 80 to 100 years of continuous work. They tell us this was accomplished by medieval workers using primitive tools, no electricity, no computers, no modern equipment whatsoever. But perhaps that's not what happened at all. The technology that wasn't there. Picture the 13th century for a moment. Really picture it. No trucks rumbling down highways. No cranes lifting multi-ton blocks into position. No architectural software calculating load-bearing stress. No electric lights illuminating the work site after sunset. No steel cables. No power tools. No concrete mixers. No railways to transport materials across distances. Just wood, rope, pulleys, and supposedly human determination. Yet somehow, workers quarried millions of tons of limestone. They transported these massive blocks across unknown distances. They lifted them to heights that would make modern construction workers nervous. They carved them into intricate, mathematically precise shapes that fit together like a three-dimensional puzzle. They created flying buttresses that distributed weight through principles of physics that wouldn't be formally understood for centuries. They built rib vaults that seemed to defy gravity itself. And they did all of this in less than a century. What if the official story is hiding something far stranger? What if the technology of the 13th century was utterly primitive in every way except one? The art of building cathedrals appeared fully formed, perfect, with no learning curve, no evolution, no mistakes. Stone masonry at the highest level existed alongside a civilization that couldn't even print books yet. Does that sound reasonable? Or does it sound like someone trying to explain artifacts they found but didn't create? The global pattern Reims is not alone. That's what makes this so disturbing. From Chartres to Cologne, from Canterbury to Milan, these impossible structures dot the European landscape like accusations, each one a marvel of engineering, each one supposedly built in decades by people who lived in what historians describe as the Dark Ages. They stand as silent rebukes to our modern era. We, with all our technology, barely understand the fundamental questions. How were they made? Not why. We have plenty of religious explanations for why. But how? The official histories skip past the uncomfortable details. They assume logistics that would challenge modern civilization. They assume knowledge of geometry, trigonometry, physics, and material science that supposedly didn't exist in any textbook of the time. They assume organizational structures capable of coordinating thousands of workers, millions of stone blocks, decades of continuous labor, all without computers, without phones, without even accurate timekeeping devices. The questions nobody answers. Where are the quarries for Reims Cathedral alone? Perhaps millions of tons of limestone were required. That's not a small operation. That's mountains of stone. Yet historical records offer vague gestures toward local sources without specifying locations, without describing the industrial-scale excavation that must have occurred. How were the stones shaped? Each block had to be cut to precise dimensions. No two pieces were identical. Gothic architecture required custom-fit stones for every position. Modern stonemasons, using power tools, describe Gothic stone carving as incredibly time-consuming and difficult. Yet medieval workers supposedly produced thousands upon thousands of perfectly carved stones using hand chisels. How were they transported? A single limestone block could weigh several tons. Moving one such block a single mile without modern equipment would be a day's work for dozens of men. Yet somehow, endless supplies of these blocks arrived at construction sites continuously for decades. Where are the chronicles describing these transport operations? Where are the roads they would have destroyed under the weight? Where are the accounts of the logistics empire required to coordinate this? And perhaps most troubling of all, where are the people? Building a Gothic cathedral required enormous workforces. Hundreds of specialized craftsmen, stonemasons, sculptors, glaziers, carpenters, metalworkers, thousands of laborers to move materials. All these people needed food, housing, clothing, payment, organization. Yet medieval records that obsessively document minor church disputes somehow forget to mention the massive industrial operation happening right outside their windows. The paradox is inescapable. A supposedly primitive civilization with wooden carts and torches somehow orchestrated logistics that would challenge modern project management. The convenient fires, here's where the pattern becomes darker. Nearly every Gothic cathedral shares the same origin story. It was built to replace an earlier wooden church that mysteriously burned down. Reims, fire in 1210, 1 year before construction supposedly began. Is this not convenient? Too convenient, perhaps? Think about the mathematical probability. Dozens of major cathedrals across Europe. Each one just happens to have been built on the ashes of a predecessor that burned. Each fire occurring just before one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history begins. Fire provides the perfect historical excuse. It explains why there's no documentation from the previous building. It explains the sudden urgent need to build something new. It erases evidence. It creates a clean slate for historians to work with. But what if these fires never happened? What if they're narrative inventions created centuries later to explain buildings that already existed? Buildings that needed an origin story that made sense within the accepted timeline. After all, stone doesn't burn. Cathedrals are made of stone. So these fires supposedly destroyed wooden churches, after which stone cathedrals magically appeared. How convenient that the evidence of what came before was always conveniently incinerated. The phantom architect official source his name Jean d'Orbais as the master architect of Reims Cathedral, working from 1211 to 1231. 20 years of his life supposedly dedicated to this project. But who was Jean d'Orbais? The answer is, nobody knows. There's no biography, no surviving drawings or calculations, no letters, no records of where he trained or who taught him, no evidence of what he did before Reims or after, no students carrying on his legacy. His name appears in a labyrinth mosaic in the cathedral's floor, and that's essentially it. This man supposedly designed one of the most complex structures in human history, requiring advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering. Yet he left behind less documentation than a modern student intern. Perhaps more troubling, references to the name Jean appear connected to buildings from centuries earlier and centuries later, as if historians simply attached a generic name to any structure they couldn't explain. This is not a person. This is a placeholder, a name inserted into gaps in the historical record to make the timeline appear complete. The logical question becomes, did Jean d'Orbais build Reims Cathedral? Or did he simply manage it, oversee it, maintain a structure that was already there, and later chroniclers mistook maintenance for construction? The mathematics of truth. Everything described so far is circumstantial. Suspicious, yes. Troubling, certainly. But not proof. However, there is one domain where lies cannot survive. Mathematics. Historians can invent narratives. They can write fictional biographies. They can attribute buildings to phantom architects. They can conjure convenient fires from thin air. But they cannot argue with numbers. Mathematics is the language of the universe itself, and it does not compromise. What if we could use their own statistics, their own accepted data, to prove the official timeline is impossible? What if we could demonstrate, using only mainstream demographic numbers, that the civilization supposedly building Gothic cathedrals mathematically could not have existed? That's exactly what we're about to do. We're going to take official population growth data from the last 200 years, data no historian disputes, and apply it backward through time. We're going to use their own mathematics against their own mythology, and what we discover will change everything. Because when you follow the numbers to their logical conclusion, you arrive at a result so absurd, so impossible, that only two explanations remain. Either all of human history before the 18th century is fiction, or something catastrophic happened recently that history books are hiding from us. Something that wiped the slate clean. Something that left our ancestors wandering through the ruins of a previous world, misunderstanding what they found, and writing origin stories for wonders they inherited but didn't create. The mathematics is about to reveal the truth. And the truth is far stranger than you imagined. Let's begin with something nobody disputes: official population statistics from the last 250 years. These numbers come from government censuses, university demographic studies, and historical records that mainstream historians accept without question. England grew from roughly 9 million people in the 1770s to 65 million today. Spain added over 20 million people in just 70 years during the 19th and 20th centuries. Country after country shows explosive growth during the modern era. These growth rates are documented, measured, accepted by every academic institution on Earth. Now, here's the experiment. What if we take that same mathematical model, the same growth curves, the same demographic patterns, and apply it backward? What if we reverse the direction and calculate what populations must have looked like in the past, using the exact same mathematics that describes their growth into the present? We're not inventing new theories. We're not introducing controversial assumptions. We're using their own numbers, their own mathematics, their own official statistics, and we're simply running the equation in reverse. What could possibly go wrong? The backward journey. Let's start with global population figures and work our way into the past, decade by decade, century by century. 100 years ago, in 1926, the world population was significantly smaller than today, but still counted in billions. No controversy there. Go back to 1886, 140 years ago. Official demographic data tells us approximately 928 million people lived on Earth. Not even a billion yet. Already we're seeing how recently the population explosion occurred. Rewind further to 1817. The number drops to roughly 314 million people on the entire planet. That's less than the current population of the United States spread across every continent. Think about that. All of Africa, all of Asia, all of Europe, all of the Americas, combined, holding fewer people than currently live in one modern nation. But we're still in reasonable territory. 300 million people could build cities, wage wars, create art. This is still a functioning civilization. Keep going. 1748, fewer than 130 years before the photograph was invented. The calculation gives us approximately 106 million people worldwide. That's the population of modern Japan for the entire Earth. Every forest, every plain, every valley, every coast. 106 million souls total. Still possible, perhaps, sparse, but possible. Now we approach the danger zone. 1610, the era when official history tells us the Renaissance was flourishing, when massive construction projects were happening across Europe, when global empires were competing for resources. The mathematics says 11.8 million people lived on Earth. That's fewer people than currently live in Moscow. One city. Think about Moscow's population trying to inhabit every continent simultaneously. How spread out would they be? How could they coordinate? How could they build anything requiring large workforces? The cathedral era, now we arrive at the critical moment. The 1200s. The era of Gothic cathedral construction. The period when historians claim dozens of massive stone monuments were being raised simultaneously across Europe. Apply the demographic mathematics to the year 1200. The result is 18,700 people on the entire planet. Read that again. 18,700. Total everywhere. That's not a civilization. That's a small town. That's barely enough to fill a sports stadium. And yet, somehow, according to official history, this population, scattered across all continents, was quarrying millions of tons of stone, transporting it vast distances, and assembling it into the most complex architectural achievements in human history. Who was doing this work? If 18,700 people existed total, how many were in Europe? How many were skilled stonemasons? How many were available to work on cathedrals instead of farming, hunting, raising children, defending territory, or simply surviving? The mathematics has delivered its verdict. It's impossible. Not difficult, not improbable. Mathematically impossible. The official timeline cannot be accurate. The numbers don't allow it. The final calculation. But let's not stop there. Let's push the calculation to its logical extreme. Let's see where this demographic model ultimately leads when we rewind all the way to the year 600, the early medieval period, when official history describes entire kingdoms rising and falling. Apply the exponential population decline model consistently. The result: 3 people, 3 human beings on planet Earth. Not 3 million, not 3,000, 3 individuals. According to the official demographic mathematics applied backward, human civilization in the year 600 consisted of 3 people standing somewhere on a planet of empty cities, silent monuments, and abandoned infrastructure. This is not an exaggeration. This is not artistic license. This is the direct mathematical consequence of accepting official population growth data and applying it in reverse through time. The interpretation fork. So now we face a choice. 2 paths of interpretation stretch before us, and we must choose one. Path 1. Human civilization literally began around the 6th or 7th century with a handful of people. Everything described before that, ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, China's dynasties, is complete fiction. Invented wholesale. Every artifact, supposedly from earlier periods, was actually created much more recently. This path requires us to believe that thousands of historians, archaeologists, and scientists across centuries have been either fooled or complicit in a conspiracy of staggering proportions. This path is absurd. We reject it. Path 2. The mathematics is correct, but our initial assumption is wrong. Human history is not a smooth, continuous upward curve. It's not an unbroken chain of population growth stretching back to ancient times. Instead, something interrupted that chain. Something catastrophic. Something recent. There was a break. A rupture. A cataclysm that nearly ended everything. This is the only interpretation that makes the mathematics work while preserving logic. And once you see it, everything else clicks into place. The cataclysm theory. What if, sometime in the relatively recent past, perhaps around 1776, perhaps slightly earlier or later, something happened to Earth? Something so devastating it almost completely annihilated human population. Something that erased collective memory. Something that destroyed the infrastructure, the knowledge, the technology of whatever civilization existed before. This is the master key. This single concept unlocks every door, solves every paradox, explains every impossibility we've discussed. The explosive population growth of the 19th and 20th centuries. Not a continuation of historical trends. It's demographic recovery. It's the survivors multiplying rapidly after near extinction, exactly as populations do when given resources and empty territory. The technological primitiveness of the early 1800s, despite sophisticated architecture. Because the architecture wasn't built by 1800-era people. It was inherited. The survivors emerged into a world full of structures they didn't create and couldn't replicate. The absent documentation, the phantom architects, the vague histories. Because the records were written after the catastrophe by people trying to make sense of ruins, they looked at cathedrals and asked, where did these come from? And they invented origin stories, construction timelines, architect names, convenient fires to fill the uncomfortable gaps. The photographic evidence. The oldest photographs offer haunting confirmation. Daguerreotypes and early photographs from the 1850s and 1860s show something strange. The cathedrals already stand, looking ancient and weathered. Many appear partially buried, with their lowest levels sunken into accumulated earth, a sign of structures that survived some catastrophic event that drastically altered ground levels. The stonework shows centuries of wear, erosion, damage. But surrounding these magnificent structures, primitive civilization, people in simple clothing, wooden carts, dirt roads. Not a single photograph shows active Gothic cathedral construction, even though official timelines claim many were still being built or completed in this era. What we see in these photographs are not builders. We see survivors, people living among ruins they inherited, people repurposing, maintaining and adapting structures from a previous age. These images capture a civilization in the act of rediscovery, not creation. The global pattern. Perhaps most intriguing, similar architectural motifs appear across vast distances. Styles that official history attributes to different cultures, different eras, different isolated civilizations. Yet they share unmistakable design elements. Griffins carved in remarkably similar styles from Europe to Asia. Architectural proportions that repeat across continents. Building techniques that supposedly developed independently in regions with no contact, yet produce nearly identical results. Photographs from Athens in the 1860s reveal structures bearing these universal design elements. Not Greek, not Roman. Something else, something that preceded both, using an architectural language that once spanned the globe. This wasn't cultural diffusion. This was a unified civilization. A single global culture whose monuments survived its own extinction, scattered across the planet like breadcrumbs from a vanished feast. Later, after the cataclysm, survivors in different regions found these ruins and incorporated them into new national mythologies. They became French Gothic, Italian Renaissance, Greek Classical. But originally, they were something else entirely. Something that has been carefully erased from official history. The conclusion. The cathedrals, the palaces, the great stone monuments, we're told, were built by primitive medieval societies. They weren't. They couldn't have been. The mathematics proves it beyond reasonable doubt. These structures are inheritance from a pre-cataclysm world, a civilization that achieved technological and organizational sophistication we're only now beginning to match. A global culture that left monuments in stone, monuments that survived when everything else was destroyed. Our modern civilization is not the first on this planet. We are not the inheritors of a continuous upward march of progress, from cave dwellers to space explorers. We are the descendants of survivors. Survivors of something so terrible, it wiped nearly all human life from Earth. Survivors who woke in a world of ruins and slowly, painfully rebuilt, never fully understanding what they'd lost. The official history we're taught, the neat timeline from ancient civilizations through medieval times to modernity, is a construction. A narrative created by survivors trying to make sense of artifacts they found, but didn't create. A story written to hide the uncomfortable truth. Our history is much shorter, much more fragile, and much more tragic than we've been told. The evidence was always here. The numbers have been there all along. The population statistics, the demographic data, the photographs, the buildings themselves, standing like accusations against the official timeline. They were waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to ask the obvious questions and follow them to their logical conclusion. This investigation has only begun. The deeper you look, the more evidence emerges. Every cathedral becomes a crime scene. Every official date becomes suspect. Every historian's explanation reveals its cracks under mathematical scrutiny. The monuments aren't testimonies to human achievement. They're tombstones for a world that died. And we've been living in its cemetery all along without realizing it. What else are they hiding? What else did we forget? And perhaps most troubling of all, what caused the cataclysm that reset human civilization just 250 years ago? These questions don't have comfortable answers, but they have true answers, and the truth, no matter how disturbing, is always worth pursuing. The numbers are here. The evidence is here. The reality is here, hidden in plain sight. Perhaps it's time we stopped believing the stories we've been told and started believing what we can prove.